Hi, I'm Bob, a PhD candidate in Clemson University. It's my pleasure to present my work, and I look forward to any feedback and advice. My research is about the power of marriage, the causal effect of a stable marriage on the child's adult earnings. A stable marriage between parents plays an essential role in the child's well-being. Unfortunately, the percentage of the two-parent families has dropped over time from 75% in 1968 to 64% in 2017. Have you ever wondered if your childhood family structure or your parents' marital stability affects your educational attainment and your future earnings? I have observed that the child's adult earnings are associated with their parents' marital stability. For both male and female workers, those who grew up in intact families where their parents maintain a stable marriage earn more than their counterparts who are reared by parents with an unstable marriage, who have ever divorced, separated, or widowed. The hourly earnings are significantly different between the two groups of children with different parental marital status. I define a stable parental marriage as parents living together and maintaining married or cohabiting for all the 16 years of their offspring's childhood. I define an unstable marriage as parents ever experiencing divorce, separation, being widowed, or being a single parent at any time during the child's 16 years of childhood. The correlation between the parents' marital stability and the child's adult earnings does not necessarily mean causality. My research determines whether there is a causal relationship between them. If yes, how this effect varies with parental and child's factors. I also look into the mechanism that links the parents' marriage to the child's future earnings. In previous studies, there was a lack of consensus on the parental marriage effect on the child's adult earnings. Lang and Zagorski found no evidence that the presence of both parents affects the child's adult earnings after controlling for a variety of parental and child factors, such as the parent's education and the child's race and region dynamics. Craig found a parental divorce effect on the adult son's earnings. It lowers the son's earnings by 3%, but does not influence adult daughters. Kane et al. Found that parental separation and divorce reduced the child's adult earnings by 3 to 12%. On the other hand, most studies found that parental divorce has a detrimental effect on the child's educational attainment. For example, LaFauna found that parental separation is linked to poorer educational attainment for their children. The effect varies with ages and is more detrimental to boys. I link the parents' marital stability to their child's adult earnings using the PSID survey data and look at the parents' marital stability for all the 16 years of their offspring's childhood instead of a certain point in time. It's a new angle to look at the impact of the parental marriage. I apply the two-stage least squares measure to the individual level data and find a positive and significant causal effect of a stable marriage on the child's adult earnings. This effect varies with parents' education, income, and the child's gender. I also look into the 3 channels through which the parental marriage influences the child's adult earnings. Among them, the child's educational attainment is the primary mechanism. To identify the causal relationship, I adopt 2 specification strategies. First, I include all the observed parental and child factors in the model to obtain the Ceteris Paribus effect, meaning that holding all the other relevant factors constant. I include the parental education and the parental income in the model to disentangle the parental marital stability effect from the other parental influence. The child's age, gender, race, region, and tenure are also correlated with both the parental marital stability and the child's adult earnings. So I use them as control variables. The OLS estimates decrease as more control variables are added to the model. The last column shows that the children who grew up in intact families where their parents maintain a stable marriage earn about 17% more than their counterparts reared by parents with an unstable marriage, holding relevant parental and child factors constant. The unobserved factors could affect both the parents' marital stability and the child's adult earnings. So it will lead to omitted variable bias using OLS. They could be the family traditions or the genetic characteristics, such as patience or attractiveness, that is passed down over generations. They could be the unobserved child's personality or qualities. They could be the unmeasured parents' social network. For instance, patience is an unmeasured virtue that is closely related to a stable marriage. Children inherit their parents' patience, and the child's patience has a positive impact on their job performance and their earnings. If patience is omitted from the model, the OLS estimate will be upward biased because the patient virtue is positively correlated with both the parents' marital stability and the child's adult earnings. Another bias comes from the bad kids story. Some parents could divorce because their kids are bad in the sense that they cause too much trouble to the parents. These bad kids do poorly in the labor market later and earn less than the good kids. Without considering it, it would also lead to bias. In addition to the child's personality and qualities, there are unobserved parental factors, such as the parents' social network. The parents with a stable marriage are more likely to have a stronger network of friends who could help their children with their jobs. If this is the case, the parents' marital stability effect on the child's adult earnings will be overestimated using OLS because the parents' social network are positively correlated with both the parents' marital stability and the child's adult earnings. To alleviate the omitted variable bias, I use two instrument variables, the state-level divorce rates and the implementation of the low-fall divorce law. For the endogenous expenditure variable, the parents' marital stability, and adopt the two-stage least squares method. A valid instrument should satisfy two requirements. First, it must be highly correlated with the endogenous variable, the parents' marital stability. It could be verified in the first stage of the two-stage least squares. A 1% increase in the state divorce rates is associated with a 15% decrease in the probability of the parents maintaining a stable marriage. The implementation of the no-fault divorce law reduces the likelihood of a stable marriage between parents by 20%. The statistics in the first stage confirm that the instruments have decent prediction power and explanatory ability. On the other hand, the state-level divorce rate and the implementation of the no-fault divorce law are not likely to affect the child's adult earnings directly or indirectly through any other channels rather than through the parents' marriage. The state-level divorce rate is an aggregate variable. The no-fault divorce law enforcement is a government policy. They are not likely to change the unobserved omitted variables in the model, conditional on all the controls. In other words, the unobserved child's personality and qualities would not be affected by the no-fault divorce law enforcement or the state divorce rates. The unmeasured parent social network will not be affected by the IVs either. Therefore, the IVs satisfy both the instrument relevance and the instrument exogeneity requirements. The two-stage least square estimate is 0.161. This is the causal effect of a stable marriage on the child's adult earnings, because we have already controlled for the relevant parental and child factors and corrected the omitted variable bias. Next, I add the interaction term of the parent's marital stability dummy and the parent's household income to the model to determine how the effect changes with parent's household income. In the left graph, the vertical distance between the two lines is the earnings gap between the two groups of children with different parental marital status. It becomes larger as the parent's household income increases. The right graph shows the parent's marital stability effect on the child's adult earnings directly. It displays the same pattern. The parent's marital stability and the parent's household income during their offspring's childhood reinforce each other in raising their child's future earnings. I find a similar pattern for the better educated parents. The stable marriage between the well-educated parents helps their children earn more in adulthood and achieve a better life. The child's gender also matters. A stable marriage has a larger and more significant effect on the son's adult earnings than on the daughter's, as the left graph shows. The right graph shows that the marital stability effect is more noticeable in the middle of the child's career. This heterogeneous pattern of the parents' marital stability effect on the child's adult earnings can also be seen in the subsample regressions. Generally speaking, the parents' marital stability effect on the child's adult earnings is greater and more significant for the children whose parental households had more resources, for the children whose parents are well educated, and for the sons instead of daughters, and for those who are in the middle of their careers. For instance, a son who grew up in a stable family whose parent is a college graduate earn about 24% more on average than his counterparts with the same background, but grew up in unstable families. By contrast, a daughter from a stable family whose parent is a high school graduate does not significantly earn more than her counterparts from unstable families. I do the robustness check and discuss the concerns over the estimates. The first concern is the child's self-selection into the labor force, which could bias the estimate if the selection is not random. I follow the Heckman's two-step procedure and find that the sample selection bias is not severe. the estimates with the sample selection bias correction is slightly smaller than the OLS estimate. In the quantile regressions, for the 25th, 50th, and 75th percentiles of the child's hourly earnings distribution, I could not reject the null hypothesis that the parents' mental stability on the child's earnings are the same for the children in different earnings percentiles. Next, I consider the possible endogeneity of the parents' household income and the parents' educational attainment. I treat them as exogenous variables in the model. Parents usually complete their education before they have children or even before they have a marriage. The factors that influence the child's earnings are not likely to affect the educational level the parents obtain, conditional on all the controls in the model. The parents' household income during the offspring's triquet, on the other hand, are more likely to be endogenous because it's related to the child's status and the parents' marital status. There are two solutions to this issue. First, I can simply drop the parents' household income in the model because I have the parents' educational attainment in the model, which can be seen as a proxy for the parents' income. However, the parents' marital stability effect will become larger because it absorbs part of the parents' income effect. For the purpose to disentangle the parents' marital stability effect from the other parental influence, I intend to include both the parents' income and parents' education in the model and use the second method to alleviate the possible endogeneity of the parents' income. The second method is to use the two instrument variables, the state level divorce rates and the no-fault divorce law enforcement for the two endogenous variables, the parents' marital stability and the parents' income. The estimate using this strategy is 0.155. It's close to the estimate of 0.161 when parents' income is treated as exogenous variable. In the second part of the research, I investigate the mechanism that links the parental marriage to the child's earnings. There are three channels through which the parental marriage affects the child's earnings. Among them, the investment in child's education is the primary channel. The parents with a stable marriage tend to invest more in their child's education. It can be proved that the education channel accounts for more than 40% of the total effect. To estimate the parents' marital stability effect on the child's educational attainment, I use the parents' income, parents' education, and the child's demographic characteristics as the control variables to obtain the Ceteris Paribus effect. It is 0.7 years. When I use the two instruments, the state-level divorce rates and the no-fault divorce law enforcement for the endogenous parents' marital stability, I obtain the consistent two-stage least squares estimate is 0.9 years, which means the children from stable families have 0.5 years more education than the children from unstable families, holding other factors constant. As the major mechanism, the parents' educational attainment can explain the heterogeneous pattern of the marital stability effect on the child's earnings. According to the graph, the children from stable families receive more schooling than the children from unstable families. It is true for both sons and daughters, and this is the main reason why children from stable families are more in adulthood than children from unstable families. Second, a stable marriage has a greater effect on the son's education than the daughters because the vertical distance is larger for the sons. And this is the reason for greater marital stability effect on the son's adult earnings. Similarly, a stable marriage has a more significant effect on the child's educational attainment when the parent's income or parent's education is higher. And this explains why the parent's marital stability effect on the child's adult earnings is more significant for wealthy parents or well-educated parents. The marital stability effect on the child's educational attainment is parallel to the pattern of the marital stability effect on the child's adult earnings. Finally, I examined the causal relationship between a stable marriage and the intergenerational earnings transmission. Intergenerational earnings transmission inequality has been an intriguing issue for decades. High-income parents are more likely to have high-income children. The parent-child earnings transmission table shows the quintiles of the child's adult earnings for each quintile of the parent's income. For the parents ranked in the top quintile, the adult children have a 38.9% chance to stay in the top quintile of the earnings distribution themselves. 25.8% of the children of the top quintile parents are in the fourth earnings quintile. The percentage becomes smaller for the lower quintiles. The probability of ending up in the bottom quintile is less than 10%. If parents' income and the children's earnings are not correlated with each other, the possibility for the children to be in each quintile should be around 20%. The unequal intergenerational earnings transmission raises the question of what factors are responsible for this inequality. First, I analyzed the intergenerational earnings transmission inequality by graphs. The age-adjusted parent-child earnings transmission diagram shows the correlation between the parent's income and the child's earnings. When the child's demographic characteristics, such as age, gender, race, region, and tenure, are included in the model, the residual child's adult earnings still display a strong correlation with the parent's income. When I only include the parent's marital stability dummy in the model, the residual child's adult earnings become much more equally distributed for each decile of the parent's income. Therefore, the parent's marital stability dummy alone can explain the unequal intergenerational earnings transmission very well. I also looked into the causal effect of a stable marriage on the intergenerational relative earnings change between parents and children. The generational earnings change, relative earnings change, is defined as the change in the earnings deciles between parents and children. An intergenerational relative earnings improvement occurs when the child's relative earnings is at a higher decile than the parents. And intergenerational relative earnings worsening occurs when the child's relative earnings is at a lower position than the parents. The two-stage ordered Probit model shows that having a stable family in childhood lowers the probability of the intergenerational relative earnings worsening by 7%. and also increases the relative earnings improvement by 7% on average, holding other relevant factors constant. In summary, the children from an intact family where their parents maintain a stable marriage earn 17% more than their counterparts reared by parents with an unstable marriage, holding relevant parental and child factors constant and accounting for omitted variable bias. The children from stable families have 0.9 more years of schooling than the children from unstable families. A stable marriage not only has a positive and significant effect on the child's adult earnings in absolute values, but it also encourages the intergenerational relative earnings improvement. It demonstrates the power of a stable marriage. Thank you.